1920s, and they call it the Jazz Age. Okay? The Roaring Twenties refers to the mood of the 1920s. It's not that everybody was just talking loud or whatever, but the 1920s, the mood was very upbeat. Okay? It was very upbeat. It was exciting. Economically, it was the best decade that we had ever had in American history up to this point. Up to this point. Okay? Or at least it appeared to be. We're going to find out in 1929 that not everything is as it seems. Okay? Because we're going to hit the Great Depression. And then we're going to go, whoa, what happened? I thought things were great. But the perception was in the 1920s everything was great. Most Americans had money in their pockets. And generally when people have a little bit of money, they tend to be a little bit happier sometimes, right? I got a little money, I can buy some food, I can buy a car, I can buy some clothes, whatever. Most American families owned a car in the 1920s. Okay, so people had cars, people had a little bit of money, most people had jobs, the unemployment rate was very low, and so the mood of the 1920s was very upbeat. Another nickname of the 20s was the Jazz Age, because jazz music caught on in the 1920s. It was invented before then, back in the turn of the century. Okay? But it never found its niche in our society. It never fit in until the 1920s. The style of music went perfect with the mood of the 1920s. So jazz is going to catch on. Now we're going to talk about the jazz part of it tomorrow. Okay? But it actually catches on in New York City, up in Harlem. Most of y'all have heard of Harlem, which is a section of New York City, a borough. Today we think of Harlem as, whoa, that's a really, really poor area of America, you know, that kind of thing. But in the 1920s, Harlem was happening. It was the place to be. And if you were a musician, if you performed in Harlem, you had made it. You had made the big time. It was kind of like, Miss Moore, do you remember the comedians? If you ever made it on Johnny Carson, you had made it. You knew you had made it as a comedian. Especially if he called you over to come sit down by it. Then you were on to the big time. Okay? If you performed, if you were a jazz musician and you performed in Harlem in one of their nightclubs, you had made it. Okay? So we'll get into that part of it tomorrow. But we're going to talk about several things, but what I want to do in this chapter, normally I kind of give you my version of the era, and then we go back and look at the book and kind of fill in the gaps. I want to do something different with the 20s. We're just going to kind of follow along the Jarrett book. And if you look on page 175, it actually starts out, I don't know why the book starts out like this, but it actually starts out with one of the bad things of the 1920s. And most of the 1920s we heard about all the good stuff. But there were a few black eyes. There were a few negative things about the 1920s. And one of the most negative things in the 1920s was the Red Scare. Okay? And that's what the Jarrett book starts out with, talking about what was the Red Scare. Okay? The Red Scare was the fear of communism coming into America. Okay? So why did we have this scare? Where did this fear come that communism was creeping in to American society? Well, it goes back to World War I. Now, remember last week we were talking about the Bolshevik Revolution with Vladimir Lenin in Russia. And he overthrew the Russian people, and he set up a communist country in Russia. Okay, y'all remember that? Okay. After Lenin took over Russia and turned it into a communist nation, he made the comment several times that he wanted communism to spread throughout the entire world. That the only way for communism to survive is for it to go in and take over other countries. And so he's basically making this declaration that he wants communism to infiltrate, to get into all the other countries around the world. So in America, we get this message, and all of a sudden, we're thinking, well, man, we can't have that come into America because communism is a total opposite of democracy. That's not what we stand for. Well, what happened was, in the 1920s, people started becoming suspicious of other citizens. If you did something that was considered not normal American, then people would kind of go, I wonder if he's a communist. Because they're weird. And they're not doing what the majority of us Americans do. Now, in the 1920s, most Americans were very patriotic. We just finished World War I. I mean, we are flag-waving, patriotic Americans. Imagine this. Let me just give you a scenario. July 4th. We all know how important July 4th is. Most people pop firecrackers, especially then. Nowadays, we got all these city ordinances. We can't do it. But in the 1920s, everybody's popping firecrackers. Everybody's grilling out, just like they do today. You're grilling your hot dogs, your hamburgers, your barbecue, you know. It's July 4th. You got your flag out. You're wearing patriotic clothing, whatever. Now, what if your next door neighbor, they're not doing any of that? And this is the 1920s. And everybody in the neighborhood is celebrating the 4th, but you got your neighbors over there, they ain't doing any of that. They're not cooking out. They're not waving the flag. And you're going, wait a minute. Who doesn't do that? That's not normal. That's weird. Well, maybe they're communists. Maybe they're the people we were warned about that are creeping into our society. And we don't need people like that in the neighborhood. They're going to bring down the fabric of America. Okay? So, if you were not acting like a normal American in the 1920s, then you could be considered a communist. Okay? Now, obviously this wouldn't work in 2014. Crud. I don't even know what normal is anymore. I mean, I look around, I wouldn't even know where to start. Okay? And I'll get back to that in a minute. Let me show you something that came out of the Red Scare. Now, first of all, why do we call it red? Well, the Russians, their army, their flag, their colors are red. Okay? And so when you hear Red Scare, we associate the color red with Russia. And we associate communism with Russia. So that's why it became the Red Scare, not the Blue Scare or the Yellow Scare or something. Okay? Now, one of the things that came out of this Red Scare, that came out of this fear of communism, was a thing called the Palmer Raids. What were the Palmer Raids? Mitchell Palmer, who was the United States Attorney General of the United States. That's a big wig, okay? He created a group that went around in America. I can't believe we did this, that we got away with this in the 20s. But they went around and they rounded up people that were suspected communists. You ever heard of a rattlesnake roundup? Well, this was a commie roundup. He was able to go around the country and round up people that other people accused of being a commie. Well, they're different. They're weird. They got to be a commie. So they would bring them in and they would question them to find out if they were really a communist or were they just weird. And most of the time, they found out they were just weird. Okay? They were just weird. And so, but they did. They rounded them up. They violated people's civil rights. They violated the Constitution because, hey, they're communists. They got to be. They play soccer. That ain't normal. No, I'm just kidding. They don't cook hamburgers on the 4th of July. What is wrong with you? You know? They don't like Mexican food. There's something seriously wrong with you, right? Or they don't like pizza or whatever. You know? We can think about that today. I mean, compare that to 2014. I know we'd have a hard time figuring out what's normal, what's not normal. But there are certain things. For example, in America today, on Sunday afternoon, most TVs are watching football. Mm-hmm. Most TVs. No, I'm talking about the majority. Majority of American homes have football on their TV on Sunday afternoons. Whether you're a huge footballer fan or not, somebody in that family's got the TV on there watching the Cowboys play. The minority would be those who didn't have a football game on. Now, I don't know if Miss Lopez, oh, can I say that?
Yes.
Okay. Did you have football on yesterday?
No.
You're a commie.
I like football, but yesterday was busy.
You were busy.
I was not home.
What about on Saturdays? Do you have the college football games?
I don't like college.
You know, I see. You're professional.
Because
You skip straight to the pros.
Straight to
Straight to
the
the
top.
pros. Okay. But that would not be, again, the minority of people in America and their TV wouldn't have football. They have something else on. Well, we would go, well, that's kind of different. That's kind of weird. They don't like that. Or if you said to me, Coach, I don't like apple pie.
Ew.
Okay, Dave, that's strike 2 against you. I think we may have found our first communist, right?
Disgusting.
No football in the house. Doesn't like. Okay, here's the real
She's a
test.
trainer.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, man.
Do you, if you don't like ice cream,
I don't eat it a lot.
communist.
I mean, because like I can't eat sweets like that.
So she's weird.
I
So
like
we're gonna
potato
take
pie.
Dee, and we questioned her, and we found out that she doesn't like ice cream. She doesn't like
I didn't say I don't like ice cream. I said that.
apple pie. I mean,
Apple pie's disgusting.
you probably like hot dogs and Chevrolet. If you don't like hot dogs, apple pie, and Chevrolet, that's about as American as we get.
It depends on what we're talking about.
Okay. So, leads me to my next thing. There were these two guys named Sacco and Benzetti. I think it's on 175. Is that where it is in the book? Okay, these are just an example of people that were accused of being communists because of the way they thought. And sometimes things turned out really bad for people like this. These two particular guys, they were Italian immigrants. So they weren't born in America, but they're just like everybody else that came to America. They got here. They were immigrants. And they get accused of murder. One of these guys was like a fish peddler on the streets. Like a hot dog vendor. They sell fish and stuff. And another guy worked, I believe he worked at a shoe store. And anyhow, this guy gets killed. Long story short, the only evidence they really had against these two guys is that their gun, they had a gun that matched the same type of gun that was used in the murder. Even though everybody else had the same type of gun, basically. Very common handgun. Okay? So they were put on trial. They were convicted of murder with basically very little evidence. They may have done it. They may have. But we really don't know that they did. Because there was very little evidence. Right? But it didn't really matter to a lot of people. They get convicted and they get fried. Okay, they
What
get
was that?
electric chair. Okay, they get fried. They were Italian immigrants, and here was the big kicker that went against them. They were both outspoken anarchists. Okay? They had different political views than the normal American. What's an anarchist? Anybody know? What's anarchy?
The government having government.
No government. Absence of government. So if you're an anarchist, you believe that there shouldn't be any government. Basically, there'll be no rules. That we could just live without rules, which that's insane to think that. Okay? We'd kill each other if we did that. And there'd be no penalty for doing it, right? Matter of fact, if we didn't have any rules, none of y'all would be here today. Okay? And you probably wouldn't work because you'd just fight and steal and kill and get whatever you needed to get. So they were outspoken anarchists. They didn't really support the American government. They're Italian immigrants. And they may or may not have done the crime. Who knows? Who cares? We convicted them and we killed them. We murdered them with the electric chair. The government. They were found guilty. And it didn't really matter. Most people didn't matter because they're like, hey, they were communist anyway. I mean, that was the mentality. They were communist anyway. So we didn't really care. And so that's what this Red Scare had created. It created a lot of uncertainty, created a lot of suspicion. And here's the thing, we're going to relive the Red Scare all over again in the 1950s. Except it's not going to be called the Red Scare, it's going to be called McCarthyism. because Senator Joseph McCarthy is going to come out with this list of 200-something names of American people who were communists that worked for our government. And we're all going, whoa, oh my God, we got commies that we've elected, right? So we're going to have this Red Scare all over again 30 years later. And we're going to stereotype and do that. I mean, it would be easy to do that today, in 2014.
Where's corrupt now?
I mean, I think about it now, y'all were only 3 or 4 years old when this happened. But right after September 11th, 2001, there's a lot of stereotyping going on in America. There was a lot of, it wasn't communism, it wasn't Red Scare, it was Middle Eastern scare. It was. Okay, Miss Moore can relate to this. I mean, we knew. You just go, you know, when I'd go out to the airport, get on a flight, and you're looking around. Everybody's looking around. And you're like, oh, I see 2 guys over there that are from the Middle East. Right? What are they doing? Well, is he tying his shoe? What's he doing? You know, because you didn't know. See, most of y'all don't even know this, but right after 9/11, there was a Middle Eastern guy that got on a flight that had a bomb on his shoe. And he was trying to ignite it. And you remember that this morning, and the passengers saw him, something spark, they could tell he was doing something, and they rushed him, they got him, and thank God it didn't go off. So now you're sitting, you know, everybody's sitting in the airport like this. Every flight I was on after 9/11, like, you know, you just eyeballing, what do you do? You just look like a terrorist. My neighbors who live right down the street from me, Mr. Fozzie, was a manager at Lowe's, right here on Grapevine Highway in Precinct. He was a manager, wonderful man. His family was wonderful. They were from Afghanistan. They brought us food all the time. They brought us Afghan bread. I loved it. It was great. They were very nice, but they were very devout Muslims. I mean, she always wore the headgear and the gear, and she, you know, they prayed 5 times daily on their knees facing Mecca. I mean, but wonderful people. Wonderful people. And my son was friends with their son, and they still stay in contact, by the way. They moved. It was sad. They had to move because of prejudices against them after 9/11. And he was a manager here at Lowe's. And they were wonderful. But right after 9/11, I was guilty too. I stepped out the door and looked down there like, what's he up to? You know? Because you just thought, wow, I don't know. You know. So, Red Scare of the 20s, McCarthyism in the 50s, Middle Eastern scare 13 years ago. Just 13 years ago. And now, in 2014, you can kind of relate it with Ebola. Because a lot of countries have closed their borders to flights coming out of Western Africa, out of Liberia. America hasn't. And right now there's a big cry to close our borders because we let 120-something people come in. It's like a flight that comes in there once a day. 120-something people come into our borders from West Africa. And that's how I got here to begin with. The Liberian guy got on the plane, got here, and put him in Dallas, and the 2 nurses got it. And but there's that scare. I'm like, wait a minute, where are you from? You're from Liberia? Oh, you got Ebola, you know, or you're from Sierra Leone or wherever. Canada, isn't that the one country nobody's ever scared of?
Nobody ever goes to Canada.
And you're like, where you from? Canada. None of us go, ooh, God. You know, we're like, oh, you're a wuss. You know, Canada. So, nobody even takes Canada over because it wouldn't even be worth the effort. It's just boring. You don't even have to do anything. You're like, you can have us.
Wait, what about France?
We ain't going anywhere. France, yeah, they try to. They try to, yeah. They're lovers. All right, go to, flip in your book to page 176. The next thing it talks about are the 3 presidents. The 3 Republican presidents that served during the 1920s. Okay? We had 3 elections. I've got them here on the board. We had the 1920 election, the 1924 election, the 1928 election. Okay? Warren G. Harding, won the 1920 election. Calvin Coolidge won in 24. Herbert Hoover won in 1928. They're all Republicans. The first guy, Harding, unfortunately, probably the two things he's most famous for is one is a quote that he made when he was running for the presidency. He said, "Hey, if you elect me, I will give America a, quote, return to normalcy." This is in 1920. What the heck did he mean by that? What does a return to normal mean? By the way, normalcy wasn't even a word in the English dictionary when he said that. What did, before what?
The crisis.
The war. Who said that? Okay, before the war. We just finished World War I. So he's telling the American people, as your president, I want us to return. I'm going to help lead us back to a return to normalcy. We need to get back to living our lives, the normal lives we lived before the war. I remember when President Bush Jr. stood on top of the rubble after 9/11, a week after it happened, telling the American people, we have got to return to normal. We've got to get back to our normal lives and not the terrorists of war. Because what did we do the week after we did nothing in America. There was no Friday night football games. There were no Major League Baseball games in September. It was the pennant chase. There's no flights flying anywhere. No one's traveling. Everybody's scared. And a week later, he said, we've got to get back to normal. Get back to doing what we do. And that's what Harding is saying here. The war's over. Our soldiers are back home. Get back to your normal routine. Go back, get your old job back. Get back to doing your thing. We'll be happy. Okay? Now, unfortunately, the second thing that he's famous for is the Teapot Dome scandal. And it talks about that on page 177 in your book. When Harding was elected president, he was a huge user of the spoils system. And we remember the spoils system, right? What does that mean? Student aid? I'll say your name.
Spoils are like what you take from people.
Yeah, but how do we mean that in a political sense? If you win an election, you get to do what?
Oh, you get to appoint your that's what government.
Yeah, you appoint your own people, right? That's using the spoils system. Well, Harding did that. He appointed all of his buddies in all these different government positions. But the problem was, all of his buddies were corrupt. And they were all doing things behind his back, under the table, whatever. And several of them got caught doing different stuff. Matter of fact, they had a name for them. They were called the Ohio Gang. Okay? And they were all doing all these bad stuff. But one of them, and I think it was his attorney general, did the biggest scandal. And it was the Teapot Dome scandal. Teapot Dome is government land that was up in Wyoming. It's protected government land and has oil on it. And he was letting a couple of his buddies go drill oil on government land for a kickback, for a bribe. Okay? Here's X amount of dollars under the table, Dan. I can't say that. But here's X amount of dollars. Allow us to go in there and drill. And so they got caught. They got busted. Harding didn't know it. He didn't know anything about that. He didn't know about a lot of the things his buddies were doing. And so it created a lot of stress for him. And he actually had a heart attack and died in 1923. And according to the autopsy, according to the reports, his death was attributed to stress caused by his buddies. Okay? So he kicks over in 23, and his vice president now has to take over. His vice president was Calvin Coolidge. So Coolidge is going to finish up the last year of Harding's presidency. Okay? Then he's going to run for his own 4-year term. He didn't want to, but the Republicans said, hey, we need to keep this thing going. Everything's good. You're a team player. You're going to win, so we need you to run for presidency. So he does. And he wins easily. Now, he had a nickname. His nickname was Silent cow. Try to use some common sense here. Why would anybody give you a nickname, Silent Whatever?
Don't say too much.
You don't talk.
You don't talk much. Tells you a little bit about your personality, right? You didn't talk much. What else would you think about it?
Sneaky.
Oh, I like that. I never really thought of it that way. When silent people are sneaky, they're up to something, right? What else would you think of someone who's silent? You think they're shy? Maybe?
They
Creepy?
keep to themselves.
It's like he was, yeah. From everything that I've been told or read, that, yeah, he was. He just didn't speak a lot. Kind of shy. He preferred behind the scenes as opposed to being, in a play, he didn't want to be the lead actor. He wanted to be the guy back there doing the lights, behind the scenes. He liked being vice president because that's, especially back then. Back then, in the 1920s and before, if you were vice president, nobody hardly even knew who you were. Nowadays, we know a lot more about the vice president because we have television and internet and we see them more. But even then, they're kind of in the back.
Maybe he doesn't want to take the fall for some of the stuff
That too. Maybe he didn't want that responsibility, right? So it was unusual that he was actually going to run for the presidency because he didn't like doing it. But the Republicans said, hey, basically we've got to keep this thing going. Harding's dead. It's a tough time, We need to keep the party together. So he does. But in 1928, he's not going to run for re-election. And he could have. Hasten. Okay, he could have. He could have ran for re-election. And the Republicans wanted him to. They said, listen, you're going to win. You're going to win in a landslide. By the way, during his administration, we talk about how good the economy appeared to be in the 20s. It was at its peak while he was president. At least that was the appearance, that the economy was at its best while Coolidge was president. So he's going to win easily. But he doesn't run. And they said, why not? And this is one of his famous quotes. Quote, I don't want to. Can't give more honest answer than that. I don't want to. I don't want to do it. Now, I don't know how many people would turn down a guaranteed presidency. He's going to win in a landslide. All he's got to do is put his name on the ticket. I don't want to. They didn't do it. So the Republicans choose another guy to run instead, and it was Herbert Hoover, and he's going to win. Pretty easily. Okay? So he becomes the third president we've had during the 1920s. But unfortunately for Herbert Hoover, he's going to go down in history as one of the worst presidents we've ever had. And it's, honestly, I don't know how you can blame it. What's going to happen is we're going to go into the Great Depression.
Was it because of him though?
No.
But that's what made him look
He just happened to be wrong place at the wrong time. Just like Coolidge happened to be right place at the right time. And what if Coolidge would have run? Had he run in 1928, he would have been our president. They would have went down the tubes. So, lucky for him, he got out. But Hoover's going to take, now, when we have an election every 4 years for the president, we vote on them in November. And they take office in January, 2 months later. But that's not how it used to be. Used to, you voted on them in November, they took office in March. Okay? So Hoover's going to win the 1928 election. He's going to take over, he's going to move into the White House, he's going to get sworn in March of 1929. 7 months later, in October 1929, the stock market's going to crash and we're going to go into the Great Depression. So in 7 months, we're going to go from the best of times to what? The worst of times. We've heard that slogan many times. But we're going to go from the best to the worst in 7 months while he's president. Now, I don't know anybody who can screw up the government in 7 months. Okay? He didn't have enough time to screw it up. He just happened to be the fall guy. He was the wrong place, wrong time. And so he's going to go down with the ship, and everybody's going to associate the Great Depression with Herbert Hoover. As a matter of fact, when we start studying the Great Depression here in a few days, all the homeless people in the cities, they're going to name their little homeless areas Hoovervilles. That's going to be the name of their little village, Hoovervilles, in response to the president, because they're blaming him for the Depression. Okay? So in 7 months, we're going to go down the total. There's a lot of reasons, a lot of things that happen that cause us to go into the Great Depression. But Hoover really isn't one of those reasons. Okay? But he gets elected and he's going to get blamed for it. Flip on over to page 180. Real quick, just want to touch on this. It's talking about the rise of the automobile. In 1905, I believe it was when Henry Ford created the first automobile in America. It was called the Model T Ford. But in the 1920s, he's going to come up with his second model. I think it was 1925. He comes up with the Model A Ford. So the T came before the A. This is the vehicle that most people in America are going to own in the 1920s. The assembly line, he was able to mass produce this automobile in the 1920s that most people are going to be able to afford. Now, again, I told you at the introduction today that in the 20s, most people were happy. The economy looked great. It looked like it was the best economy ever. People had money in their pockets. People were buying automobiles, buying stuff. Okay? Flip on over to page 182. This is one of the reasons why so many people thought the economy was so good and why so many people could buy a car and buy clothes and all that. Y'all see this in my hand? This is evil. Girls, pay close attention. This is evil. Ms. Lopez. This is called buying on credit. If you look on page 182.
Okay, no, credit isn't bad unless you don't know how to take care of
Handle it, which most people don't. Buying on credit. This was created in the 20s.
It has its
Credit cards, layaway plans, all that stuff, the idea came out in the 1920s. First time in America you could have a credit card. 1920. You don't have the money to buy that dress? That's okay. Put it on the plastic. Worry about it next month. Okay? And it seems like a great idea. I really want that. I gotta have it. That's right, girls, as you go to the mall. I gotta have it. Oh, it looks so good in that dress. And those shoes. Gotta have those shoes. I gotta have every color of those shoes, as a matter of fact. Right? Because y'all have to have every color of every style of shoes. But I gotta have it. But I don't have the money. So you put it on the plastic, because you ain't gotta worry about it. So I was worried about that 30 days. Next month I'll have the money. And then something comes up, car breaks down, right? Got to put it in the shop or something. Whatever extra money you thought you were going to have to pay this off next month, you had to use it. Something came up. And now you don't have it. Okay? So I'm going to give you all a valuable lesson because this is one of the reasons why the stock market crashed. It's one of the reasons we were in the Great Depression. This is one of the reasons Coach Henderson has been in a depression. This is one of the reasons many, many husbands are in a depression. And many women. I'm going to show you how this works. So you're going to get a free lesson on buying on credit. Because honestly, I don't think most people understand this. Let's say you went and put $1,000 on your credit card this month. Okay? Next month, you get a bill. I owe $1,000. Okay? Not yet. Not yet. But you go, man, dang, I don't have $1,000. I thought I was going to have $1,000, but I had all these things come up. Had to go get a new transmission. Had to go, kids needed braces. And something comes up. I needed new tires, whatever. I I don't even have $100 to pay towards that $1,000. But on your credit card statement, it says minimum amount due. Minimum amount due. In this case, it'd probably say $20. Minimum amount due. You go, oh, I got $20. So you got to at least pay the minimum amount due. So you pay the $20. You say, okay, oh, $980. I paid $20 towards that $1,000. I owe $980. And you don't spend any more on the credit card next month. Then you get a bill, and it says you owe $1,010. And you start doing the math, you go, what? I owed $1,000. I paid 20 of it. I ain't spent another penny on this, and now I owe more than I started with. That's called interest. And credit card interest rates are ridiculous. Most of them average between 19 to 29%. Oh, that's how credit cards make their money. People think, oh, that's so nice. They send this in the mail to me. I get all these, no charges for a year, free membership. Yeah. Spend, spend, spend. They make their money off you when you don't pay your bill. That's how they make their money, off interest. Okay? So, next month, you got that bill, you only got $20 again. Stuff came up. You think you pay, now you're up to $1,030. You're like, what? I keep paying towards my bill. I ain't put any on the card, and my rate, and it's higher than what I started with. Yeah. And you know what? You'll never pay off your credit card at that rate if you keep paying the minimum due. You'll never pay. I mean, it's just going to keep, interest rates going to keep eating you up. And then you're going to get in debt. And then something's going to come up, and all of a sudden you're going to have to use this again. Oh gosh, I gotta pay for this. Right? My kid needs books for college. Boom. Or I ain't got it. It's always the automobile. Something, lawnmower broke. Everybody in the neighborhood says, I ain't even mow my lawn because it looks like crap, right? Boom, I go buy a lawnmower. Yes, ma'am.
What about filing for bankruptcy or whatever?
Okay. You already learned about that?
My mom, yeah.
Okay. That's a whole other story. If you file bankruptcy and you're granted, then all your debt is eliminated, but your credit is ruined for 7 years minimum. Ruined.
Credit rate.
Yeah, so you will not be able to go purchase a home or an automobile, they just, if you file Chapter 11, as they call it, bankruptcy. Oh, by the way, I learned this too. If you ever want to file bankruptcy, you better hope you have a Democrat president.
Why?
Because it's easier to file bankruptcy with a Democrat in office than it is a Republican. The reason I know that is one of my good friends is a bankruptcy lawyer. And he's a staunch Republican. As a personal person, he prefers a Republican. But from his business standpoint, he's like, dang it, I'm better off if I've got a Democrat in office. So like right now with Obama, he likes it because his business is better. Even though he personally prefers a Republican in office, his business does better with a Democrat in office.
How come it's better to have a Democrat?
Because they're more lenient towards the bankruptcy cases.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they'll allow you. They're a lot more. Republicans are like,
Would it be like...
screw you, go figure it out.
Would it be
You put yourself in debt, pay it out. You figure it out, pay it off.
Okay.
Okay? Democrats are more forgiving. That's really what it boils down to.
Okay, so it's not 7 years with Democrat?
No, that's a law.
Oh.
Your credit's ruined if you file bankruptcy. Okay?
Can't you like gain credit back eventually?
Eventually, yeah, eventually. You better hope you don't need anything in the meantime.
Okay.
Okay? Because you're not going to get anything. No one's going to loan you anything if you file bankruptcy. Because then they know you're just going to turn and do that on them.
Okay, what about debit?
Debit, that's pay as you go. I mean, that's just,
Okay.
that's a checkbook.
Okay.
I, by the way, still use a checkbook. I do not normally get a card.
Okay.
I still use chisel and stone and big cheap pad and stuff. That's old, isn't it? That's old school. I go in and write checks like at Walmart. They look at me like I'm an old grandma or something.
My mom does that too.
Do you use checkbook? See there?
Wow.
I know.
My parents.
My grandparents.
They
everyone in
think
my
that way.
family
They're
uses
making
checkbook.
checks so expensive to buy now at the bank.
I know it, you're right, they're running us out of business.
They're trying to force us.
So in the 1920s, they give you this, okay? Now girls, here's what I'm telling you, I'm mainly girls, but guys too. This can get you in a lot of trouble. If you're able to pay it off every month, when you get a bill, it's $1,000, if you're able to pay that $1,000, great. Then, but if you get behind, I'm telling you, it happens to millions of Americans. And I'm telling you from a personal story as well, it's happened to my wife. Okay? It's happened to her. It got so out of control, she came to me. That's the last thing a woman wants to do, go to the man. And she came crying to me and said, I am screwed up. I'm like, what? And she said, you're going to have to sit down for this one. And I'm thinking it's really bad. Like, and she says, I've got myself in debt. And I'm like, huh? Because I didn't know anything about it. I've been married to a woman for 28 years almost. And she started building up some debt. And thought she could get ahead. And then the next thing you know, I thought maybe I could help her out. The next thing you know, we're paying for this. You know, with 5 kids, things come up, right? And it just started snowballing. Well, the kids needed this, kids needed that, and she like a lot of girls, she had credit cards everywhere. She had JCPenney's, Kohl's, Visa, MasterCard, American, you know. There's no telling how many you have, right, Ms. Lopez? But just credit cards, and then they start hitting you with the interest rate, and you can't pay them up. And you start getting behind, and it snowballs. Again, it happens to millions of Americans. It did in the 1920s as well. You can't pay it off. You can't pay off your credit. And yeah, so she got in some debt, and so after I handled it very poorly, I'm sure, very poorly, after I came to my senses a few weeks later, I sat down and I put her on a plan. I took all of her credit cards and shredded them all. They're all shredded. And I consolidated her debt under one payment. And I put her on a plan, and I said, we're going to pay this off in 3 years. And in 3 years, you'll be debt-free. And until now, for 3 years, we're going to live paycheck to paycheck. And so I just finished month 26 out of 36 months. So I got 10 more months to go, and then she'll be debt-free.
That's
And
not
then
bad.
she'll owe me for the rest of her life. No. A knight in shining armor has come to her rescue. But she did. She just got out of control, and she finally realized, I'm never going to see the end of this. I can't get it done. And so we've had to button down the hatches and tighten things up. And we've had to eat a few more bologna sandwiches than I like to eat.
Bologna.
I had fried bologna last night.
Wait, was it
I
good?
did. She said, what do you want? I said, give me a bologna sandwich. She goes, regular or fried? I go, oh, let's spice it up. Let's fry it.
What does fried bologna taste like?
It's just
Crunchy bologna.
it's just better bologna. What can I say? It's just better.
Yeah.
Better, huh?
In the first place, it's disgusting.
With the tortilla?
That's okay.
Of course. It's Lopez. Got to put the tortilla. Put it on the enchilada.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm eating enchiladas for lunch today. I went to Rose's.
Oh,
They have a great Sunday afternoon. It's great. And it comes wrapped. They put it in this huge
Container.
container, and it's wrapped.
My parents.
It's really cute. That's the first time I ever got it. I pulled it in there and I'm like, well, hey, I need a family thing of something. And they're like, what would you like? And I said, I need some enchiladas. They go, you want chicken, beef, or cheese? And I looked at the kids and go, cheese. So I said, give me some cheese. And I said, I got to feed 5 people. So they give me this thing. It's only $2.
Yeah. It's a lot
And
of
something
food.
says great. And yeah, they were like, oh my gosh.
Bags of
I couldn't even count how many enchiladas. And they're like 14 of them. And beans and rice and chips and sauce.
Can do it for 6.
Heck yeah. So today for lunch, I'm eating 3 cheese enchiladas, rice and beans. That's $22. That's great. So There, if y'all go to Rose's, tell them I'm building them up, so maybe they'll give you a discount next time.
Yeah. so you
That's a
can-
heck of a deal. So anyhow, there's your little free lesson on credit, okay? Be careful, because it ain't money, it's fake money, that's all it is, it's fake. You're gonna have to pay